Product managers strive to follow ideals like implementing outcome-based roadmaps over feature-based roadmaps, the continuous debate, eliminating the HiPPO effect, the highest paid person's opinion, or not allowing, sales to dictate what to build, and making data-driven decisions at every step. That's what we all aspire to. But the reality is really messy. So today we've got an expert to learn how to help us navigate these challenges. Rico Fabello is a director of product management at FactSet, a financial data and technology company that serves the investment community. He works in the data solutions organization, where he's responsible for a $55 million data product business. In his previous role, he led a team of 16 product managers and product specialists working on company data feeds and APIs, a product line that was cited as a top contributor to FactSet's growth in every Q4 earnings call across his tenure. It's pretty impressive. Prior to that, he's also held various roles in product, sales, and client service. Now, today in this webinar, Rico will share the Pragmatist Guide to Product Management Ideals, tackling all those challenges that we just cited before. So take it away, Rico.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. Really appreciate the introduction there. Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you about something that, quite honestly, I'm perhaps a bit too obsessed with, both in my personal life and in my work life, and that's pragmatism. The PM community is rife with frameworks and best practices. Many of them are more fitting for the classroom than the boardroom, so to speak. And the reality is that, well, these ideals are actually born out of genuine challenges that we face in our line of work. Many PMs don't really understand the nuances of applying them in the real world. It's rare that an idealistic solution is actually going to work well off the shelf. So what I'm going to argue today is that a more balanced approach, anchored by the virtue of pragmatism, is a big part of what separates great PMs from good PMs and drives real results for their products, for their teams, and for their organizations. Before I get started, I just want to make the disclaimer that I'm expressing my own views in this presentation. In the Q&A, I'm not representing my employer, FactSet. But with that out of the way, let's get into it. So let's look at why PMs often strive for ideals and why finding balance is actually the best path to success. So PMs, I think many of you could probably relate to this, often have a love-hate relationship with the job. At its best, product management is what I would consider an existentially fulfilling job that allows us to work with a talented group of people across our organizations to define and execute on a business strategy, all with the end goal of delivering value to our customers. But product management is hard. It's really hard. We face lots of circumstances and situations that increase our job's difficulty and complexity. We face a lot of pressure. We manage lots of stakeholders. We face a ton of uncertainty, both internally and externally. We do extensive research to understand the market and determine how we can best impact it. We make lots of difficult decisions under ambiguous circumstances. We have to say no with uncomfortable frequency. I'll stop there before your heart rate gets too high. So what do we do when faced with these challenges? Well, it's only natural that we try to implement approaches and processes in hopes that we can sufficiently address those challenges. But this sort of knee-jerk grasp at ideals in a messy world can oftentimes lead to trouble. It can give us false optimism about how we're handling our challenges and how they impact our work. It can introduce more work without any real benefit. And oftentimes it can unintentionally introduce new challenges. So what I suggest doing is pulling back and finding a balance. So my view is that being a pragmatist unlocks what I call the Goldilocks zone. This is the area of thinking and doing that maximizes our forward movement while minimizing the risk of unintended problems. This is where we do our best and our most efficient work. It's where we best balance our needs versus others' needs. It's how we succeed at our jobs long term. And this is how we increase our love to hate ratio for product management as a job. So today I'm going to walk through 5 specific examples, not exhaustive by any means, but common challenges and solutions that you'll see out there. and how to find your Goldilocks zone with each of them. Then I'm going to finish with some specific advice on how to train your pragmatic side, and then we'll move on to the Q&A portion. So let's start with roadmaps. Okay, so roadmaps. We all manage them. We're all accountable for them. They're what chart our course from point A to point B. But the thing is, managing large, complex, often highly granular roadmaps is a massive challenge for us. Not only is it time consuming, but the more time that you spend in the weeds of a roadmap, the higher the risk of losing sight of business and customer outcomes. Having this sort of obsessive focus on churning out features can slip you and your organization into feature factory mode, and team members, other stakeholders in your org, and even customers can become frustrated about and disillusioned by small-scale feature delays. So the idealist solution is to implement outcome-based roadmaps over feature-based ones. The idea that the idealist has is really to focus on business and customer outcomes over individual features. When the idealist does this, they think that they're avoiding slipping into feature factory mode, and they're avoiding undue obsession over small-scale feature delays. But there's a cost to that. What's the cost? It's really losing visibility into the work that's being done, losing sight of the importance of day-to-day, sprint-to-sprint, quarter-to-quarter execution, and really an inability to show a more detailed roadmap when asked. So what's the pragmatist solution? The pragmatist implements parallel outcome and feature-based roadmaps. This allows us to tie business and customer outcomes to the individual features that our teams work on, and it makes it easier to tie individuals' work to higher level product and business strategies. We can show a higher level outcome-focused roadmap to leadership and to customers focused on what's most relevant and impactful for them, but we still oversee and manage a feature-based roadmap one or two layers deeper than that, so that we can really understand the component parts and keep things moving. We can more easily identify the features that don't support the target outcomes and thus the strategy. And that really helps us stay focused and prioritize quality and the impact of our work over the quantity of releases. And ultimately, we can frame delays and other development challenges in the larger context of target outcomes, which brings what can be really difficult conversations with leadership or with customers to the right level and with a focus on the right things. Okay, and moving on to decisions. This is a natural part of the work that we do. We face dozens, if not hundreds sometimes, of decisions a day. Those decisions are what step by step move us forward on a very small scale, but it all adds up in the end. And we've all faced situations where we've had to justify the decisions that we've made. Validating our work and navigating complex decision-making is part and parcel of being a PM. We all have this sort of fear of making the wrong decision, especially when it really counts. We all fear not having enough of a justification when decisions don't go the right way. We try to capture lightning in a bottle when the decisions do go the right way. Naturally, we want to sort of understand how we got to that right decision, and we want to understand how we could replicate that successful decision-making on a regular basis going forward. And one thing's for sure, we rarely understand how luck and circumstance play a part in all of this. So the idealist solution is to strive for well-informed, data-driven decisions every step of the way. The idea is to collect as much information and muster as much confidence as possible so as to almost eliminate the chance of making a wrong decision. When the idealist does this, they think that they'll be able to, quite frankly, cover their ass when an abundance of excuses and justifications when they inevitably face a poor outcome. They hope they can copy and paste their process for future success. And really, they delude themselves into thinking that luck plays only a small part, or in some cases, no part whatsoever, in the outcome of their decisions. But that comes with quite a few costs. One, immense time and effort to collect the data. Two, grinding the development process to a halt, losing valuable time in getting to market. Three, losing the forest for the trees with intensive A/B testing, user interviews, and the like. These things are not, on their own bad, but you can see, and some of you have experienced situations where that can go overboard and lead to analysis paralysis. So what does the pragmatist do? The pragmatist is data-driven, of course, but to a degree. And they occasionally supplement that data with a reasonable dose of conviction. What this does is it helps us reduce the chance of a wrong decision, but we don't paralyze the entire process. we can move at the right speed and maintain some agility. We can appropriately justify decisions when need be, but we're also comfortable with sticking our necks out and showing leadership through decisiveness. Our comfort with this grows as we hone our instincts and gain more experience. So trust yourself, trust your instincts, trust your experience. Sometimes you know in your mind and in your gut what needs to be done. So now let's talk about the HiPPO effect. So I think we've all faced a time when a CEO or a CPO or some other senior leader shared an idea for a feature or an idea for how to reprioritize the roadmap, sometimes based more on a hunch or some type of experience they've had more than, a product-led process. That's the basis of the HiPPO effect, the highest paid person's opinion. Hearing and responding to feedback, opinions, and even decrees from executives and other senior leaders who aren't intimately close to the product is commonplace in product management. This is especially common at smaller companies, and especially when the founder who grew the product and the company from nothing is still in leadership. Now, clearly, they have a lot sort of at stake. Our fear is that we're going to have to change course just because of someone's sometimes fleeting thought or piece of advice or feedback. And we're afraid that's going to blow up what we believe is a carefully crafted roadmap. We, of course, take pride in our sort of cycle of ideation, validation, and development. And it can sometimes feel like when we're faced with HiPPOs that we're losing our and our team's autonomy and control when these kinds of things unexpectedly pop up. So what the idealist tends to do is to treat all ideas equally, put them to the same tests and through the same rigor as everything else in the development cycle. When an idealist does this, they think they're protecting the integrity of that development cycle and all of the product-led processes that they have in place. They think that they're protecting their roadmap. They're doing what they think is their duty to sort of stand guard and defend against unexpected and untested changes. And the idealist is very proud to have won back their autonomy and control. But at what cost? Being overly rigid and protective is not good for anyone, certainly not a PM. Sweeping aside potentially valuable feedback from experienced stakeholders could mean missing something important. And maintaining autonomy at all costs is a strange tack to take, honestly, when being a successful PM is all about being open, being reasonable, and being collaborative. So what does the pragmatist do? Well, the pragmatist respects the process and the work that the team's done, but makes room for unexpected feedback and changes and manages expectations of everyone that's involved. We see this as a great opportunity to get senior stakeholders on our side, come to a shared understanding with them of what we and our team are doing, what changes might look like, and what the impact on other work would be. We recognize that we understand and empathize with customers as part of our job, and why shouldn't we take that same approach with HiPPOs? We validate the idea just enough to ensure that there's some value in it, so that we can develop key questions and points of clarification, so that we can identify and communicate risks and build confidence across the org that the changes are merited. And really, we reframe the whole conversation so that it's more collaborative than adversarial. Part of that, and this is a very important point, is recognizing that executives are not always intentionally overstepping or dictating. They just tend to have a short and sort of pointed way of communicating their thoughts. And usually they're open to reasoned feedback. And it's important that we're not afraid to challenge them or question them if need be. Really, one of the biggest mistakes I see PMs making is thinking that they have to follow every single idea or suggestion or piece of feedback that someone more senior to them ever offers. Just like in our day-to-day work as PMs, we need to filter and prioritize those things. Here's what I call, I guess, a close cousin of the HiPPO effect. Engaging with sales is, of course, an important part of being a PM. They have valuable insight into our customers. They're sometimes the gatekeepers to the customers that we want to engage with directly. Salespeople also tend to be loud and clear about what they view as shortcomings of the products that they're tasked with selling. This one's especially close to my heart. I've spent 3 years of my career in sales before I moved to products 6 years ago. So I feel like I'm sort of well equipped to put myself in their shoes and deal with them from the other side of the org. So if we're doing our jobs well, we're going to engage with sales quite often. The challenge is separating the signal from the noise in their feedback and in their requests, and really recognizing that there's a lot of bias in interacting with salespeople. There's a lot of bias in interacting with everyone, but especially with salespeople. For one, some salespeople are louder than others. That doesn't mean they're more right than others, or that doesn't mean they have the most valuable feedback for you to hear. For another, salespeople tend to work with defined segments of our customers, so their views are always going to be colored by the kind of customers that they work with, and it might not be representative. Additionally, if your org is larger and has a globally distributed sales force, you have to be aware of the biases that come from that. When I speak to a salesperson in Asia Pac, oftentimes I'm going to hear feedback that is specific to the Asia Pac region. Maybe we don't have enough data in that region. The coverage isn't good enough. The timeliness isn't good enough. Of course, they're going to tend to say that more than something that doesn't have anything to do with the region in which they operate. So it's just something to keep in mind. Similar to the HiPPO effect, we have a fear that we're going to have to change course just because of a single salesperson or a single potential deal. We take pride in our product-led process, and so it can feel like we're being pushed to be more sales-led and reactive when we perceive that sales is able to short-circuit this process. So the idealist solution is to eliminate all noise from salespeople by disregarding their feedback and requests, I guess at its most flagrant, or rerouting them to ineffective channels, filing some type of ticket or request that just sort of sits somewhere off to the side. When an idealist does this, just like with the HiPPOs, they think they're protecting the integrity of their process and their roadmap, and the idealist is proud to have maintained a product-focused process over a sales-led one. But again, there's a cost to this. Ignoring potentially valuable feedback from the people closest to our customers could mean missing something important. Showing a lack of interest in salespeople's views will make them that much less likely to want to engage with us and less likely to want to get their customers in front of us as well. Redirecting their feedback to ineffective channels instead of having a real conversation comes off as disingenuous. And sweeping aside all salespeople's feedback will make it much less likely that you'll identify important trends or commonalities across your customers that could drive strategy and commercial success. The pragmatist respects the process and the work the team's done, but also respects the feedback of a highly valuable and in-tune stakeholder. We filter the feedback to find the signal from the noise, and we engage in good faith so that we can better understand it. We maintain our product-led process, of course, but recognizing that part of that is being informed by sales as a proxy for our customers. We do just as we did with HiPPOs. We understand and empathize with them just as we do with our customers. We validate ideas just enough to engage in real conversation with them. We put the onus on the salesperson in a collaborative way to bring relevant info and justification to the table so that we and our teams can appropriately process that and really make decisions with confidence. We manage expectations. We recognize the importance of building and maintaining a strong relationship with our salespeople. We've realized that at the end of the day, we are fundamentally aligned with our salespeople. We both want to make our customers happy, and we both want to make the business money. So we investigate whether one customer's need is indicative of a common need in the market, and we recognize that sometimes, this is the truth, we have no choice but to make a major change or shift priorities and resources just so that we can get in that big win, especially when it's strategically important for the company or a foundation for long-term big picture success. Okay, my final example. I'm going to talk about something more generic, but something that I think is really important. This actually ties everything we've discussed back to the fundamental point. Many ideals that PMs grasp for when faced with the challenges that we've been talking about are frameworks, processes, and procedures that give us comfort, but actually can sometimes do just as much harm as good. So we've talked a lot about the challenges that PMs face. Many of those challenges have to do with finding alignment on strategy in day-to-day work, collaborating effectively across many teams and functions, managing complexity, dealing with uncertainty. Of course, we fear that team members are doing unfocused work because of misalignment with strategies and objectives, or maybe just a lack of clarity around strategies and objectives. This is especially scary when you think about how many well-paid people are involved in building and maintaining a product. To waste time and resources in that case is especially painful. We fear that our resources, be it people or technology, are just not being optimally utilized, and that we're not doing enough to break down silos, or really in some cases, we're unintentionally creating silos. We see and feel the fundamental difficulty and complexity of being a PM day in and day out. So the idealist solution is to lean on frameworks and implement formal, rigid processes and procedures. When an idealist does this, let's be honest, they're just trying to cope most of the time, and we really can't blame them for that. They're trying to force alignment across teams. They're trying to focus everyone's work toward target outcomes. They're trying to break down silos and maximize resource utilization. Ultimately, they're just trying to eliminate difficulties, bring order to complexity, and shine a light on uncertainty. But as you've sort of noticed the trend here, there is a cost to that. Frameworks, processes, procedures, these things are only as good as they're relevant, and they're only as effective as they're implemented. They can create unnecessary work if applied incorrectly, which reduces our team's efficiency. Additionally, they can actually increase complexity of the work we're doing by adding too many sort of steps and checkpoints. If poorly documented, especially, then processes and procedures can add lots of confusion and waste a lot of time. Ultimately, they can fool us into thinking we're dealing with underlying challenges when in reality, we're just window dressing. So what does the pragmatist do? Well, we use frameworks, processes, and procedures as a guide, not as a rule. We know how to find the sort of right dose. We know how to encourage, not force, people to work the way that we need them to. And we bring in enough structure to succeed, but we don't overwhelm people. So we leverage these tools just enough to encourage alignment and focused work. We leverage the tools just enough to break down the silos and encourage close collaboration. And we leverage these tools just enough to deal with the most flagrant difficulties and bring order to the most unnecessary complexities. But we also recognize that difficulty, complexity, uncertainty, these are part and parcel of our jobs. The reality of it is you can't beat those factors into submission. You have to learn how to truly deal with them with nuance, using the relevant tools, but at the relevant strength and at the relevant times. So now that we've walked through 5 concrete examples of how to find the Goldilocks zone, let's talk more generally about the skills that you need to be a successful pragmatist. You need the underlying drive to do best by yourself and by your organization with a laser focus on results. You succeed as a pragmatist when you genuinely want the best for yourself, the best for your product, the best for your team, the best for your org, so on. It's with repeated success that others will start to notice the value of that pragmatic approach, which gives you permission to continue your pragmatic ways and inspires others to find their Goldilocks zones. You need to have the awareness to recognize when pragmatism is needed and where you and others fall on that continuum. So you need to keep your sort of pragmatic antenna tuned in at all times, learn when to lean in with pragmatism, learn when to sit back, and read your team members and senior stakeholders and anybody else you're working with. Try to judge their receptiveness to this type of pragmatic approach. You need to have nuanced thinking. You need to be able to see pros and cons of multiple sides. You need to anticipate unintended consequences as well. Being a good pragmatist means understanding the challenges and the ideal solutions well. Only when you understand the challenges, the solutions, and the potential downfall of some of those solutions will you be able to find that Goldilocks zone. You also need to have courage. That's a reality. You need to hold and share a perspective that is going to be different from many others in your organization. You're actually probably going to find that many people understand the challenges and think they understand the best solutions very well, but you're less likely to run into people who can operate fine. Well, first of all, find and operate in that Goldilocks zone. You'll probably face some strange looks, maybe some intense questioning when you offer your pragmatic perspective. That's okay. Be courageous. And really have the influence to show others the way and secure buy-in, even in cases where you initially face some pushback for your pragmatic approach. Your courage and leadership will help people see a different perspective. You got to engage thoughtfully with those who don't understand as well. Assume your colleagues are reasonable people who can be shown the way. Finally, you need the adaptability, there we go, to be a pragmatist no matter the team, no matter the product, and no matter the circumstances. No situation is exactly the one like the one that was before it or the one that comes after it. People are different. You need to be able to adapt to changing situations and reapply your pragmatic approach to find the best path forward for each situation you face, for each person you work with. So that brings me to the end of the prepared presentation. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you got something out of this that will make you a better PM. But now we'll move on to the Q&A portion.
Thanks, Rico. That was great. I love that Goldilocks zone. Everybody wants the bed to fit just right. So to dive into some Q&A, and while I start asking some questions, would love for all of you in attendance, please post your questions into the Zoom Q&A section. So if you're unfamiliar with Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, the more ... hit that, you'll see Q&A. And I know we've got a couple of questions in there already. So let's start with the first one. Are there certain frameworks or processes that you found work well for a pragmatist? And can you provide some examples?
Yeah, it's a good question. It obviously depends on the situation. It depends on the team. It sort of depends on the standards. But one thing in particular, one framework that I actually find holds up very well is jobs to be done. This is all about really being empathetic to our customers in a way to think about what are the things that they need to achieve and how can we think about how we can help them. And I've found it to be really successful to even just start a conversation using that as a prompt with the team as we're trying to figure out what to work on. We're trying to figure out how we want to engage with customers, to test ideas or to understand what their pain points are. So that's one thing I'll call out that, of all the sort of PM material that's out there in the ether, one thing that is worth, spending some time on. The other thing is there's a few different versions of this, but there are these sort of strategy canvases that really provide a very clear framework for thinking about how to define a product strategy. That is also something that I've seen a lot of success with in terms of getting everybody aligned. And then if you can sort of connect that work with defining your roadmap and allowing people to trace the day-to-day work that they're doing all the way up to the strategy, people feel inspired, people feel accountable, they have some ownership, and that I think fixes a lot of challenges that we tend to face in our jobs.
Right, they feel connected, right? And they realize the work is attributing directly to a company's goal, a company's mission or vision. Love that. One of the challenges, obviously, probably as we think about that idealist, is that we'd love to spend tons and tons of time, in a lot of new innovative technologies, especially in the world of AI today. So, how do we balance, and what's your pragmatist kind of perspective on this? How do we balance this need to innovate and this push towards AI with this necessity of delivering value to our customers in a timely manner?
Yeah, AI is a great example. And I have a little bit of experience in this, and that, well, AI is affecting everybody, but it's certainly affecting the investment community that my company services and that I'm sort of part of. So it's been a hot topic recently. Two thoughts really come to mind. One is you don't innovate for innovation's sake. Innovation is not something to chase in and of itself. It should have a purpose. And with AI specifically, or any other sort of hot topic that comes up, it'll be something else, tomorrow. Think about the core function of your job is not change. It's to understand how you can offer your customers something that's valuable and how you can make money doing so. Whatever sort of hot topics come up, that core foundational idea of what we do as product managers does not change. So you stay focused on that. And if there's a way that you can leverage a new technology or a new way of thinking to do that better, fantastic. If you can't, don't worry about it, and don't spend too much time trying to shoehorn it because it's the new exciting thing that everybody's talking about.
Right. So I love to think of the mental model of like a tool belt. Like AI is just another tool in your tool belt, but you have to first start with solving the customer problem. Love it. Love it. I know there's a question that says, can you show an example of a parallel roadmap? I know you may not be able to show an example live today. Can you talk about it in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I can. I can't show something, but I can talk about it. So the best way to think about it, I'm going to try not to speak about this in terms of specific tools, because everybody uses different tools, but the conceptually what I'm talking about is that, it will always make sense to continue to maintain, a sort of granular roadmap, because this is the people that are doing the work the developers that you're working with, they need something to follow. They need to know what they're doing today, this week, this sprint. So that remains the same. The key piece is really two things. One is you have a middle layer. That's how I've thought of it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to start at the top layer. So you need to have a top layer first. The top layer is the strategy. And there's sort of, layers within that. There's the overarching business strategy, which you may not have a ton of, ability to change that or impact that depending on the size of the company. But clearly, whatever company you work for will have some vision, or they should have some strategic vision. That's the top. Ideally, within your group, depending on what your role is, there is some level of strategy, even if it's just start with like, what are we going to do this year? Like, what are our target outcomes this year? If we are 12 months from now and we can go back and check these things off, that we've done it. It's not release product A. It's what are the target outcomes for the customer? Some of the outcomes may be business related, but try to keep them at that level as opposed to releasing individual products or enhancements or features. And then if you do that, you get to the middle layer, which is then the middle layer then becomes easy because, or should be, you've got that top layer, you've got the things that are being done, which hopefully should be informed anyway by the top layer, but sometimes that gets misaligned. The middle layer helps you bring it into alignment by saying, okay, here are the sort of middle layer outcomes that we hope to achieve. Maybe they're on the basis of like 1 or 2 or 3 quarters away, things that you hope to do that will affect our customers positively or the business positively or both. And then literally just tie it all together. So an example, I have a love-hate relationship with spreadsheets. I love them, but you can get really, you can get too deep into them. But if you think of it as a spreadsheet, if you have all the sort of, if you have in column A, all of the individual tasks being done, then in column B, you have it tied to at least one of the pieces of middle layer. Maybe you have like 5 sort of medium or intermediate term outcomes, tie it there, and then those outcomes should be tied to higher level strategy. That's the more 1, 2, 3 year view. And it's as simple as that. If you can do that, then you can present both versions in whatever format you want. And if I'm someone that's 6 months into my role and I'm working on task A, B, and C, and I want to feel tied in, I want to feel like I'm part of it, I can look and see how it ties up. And if I have questions or ideas, I have a framework to talk about that instead of just feeling completely disconnected from the bigger picture.
Can you talk a little bit, maybe just unpack that a little bit more? Like, what's an example outcome that you would have at that top layer and middle layer? And then maybe a follow-on question is, if I'm an enterprise product manager and I've got to communicate roadmap to customers, what advice do you have using this strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, to me, the middle layer, just as I sort of described it, is very much dictated by at what level your top layer is. So I would have, I've got limited, I've only ever worked at one company, so I can't sort of compare, but, at a larger company for sure, you're going to have that top layer is going to probably be a 3 to 5 year time horizon. It's going to be, in 3 to 5 years, we want our company to be the premier solution for XYZ or for ABC customers or something like that. And it's probably going to be multi-year initiatives of investment and development and building and releasing products to get to that point. So then the middle layer, you have a lot of room to operate because if it's a 3 to 5 year outlook at the top, then it's actually relatively easy, or should be in theory, to then cut that down to say, okay, what can we impact in the next year? This is especially helpful because there usually is some type of process around fiscal years. It's like, there might be a process around funding for fiscal years. Your headcount might be based, and resourcing might be based on fiscal years. So find the right timing to sort of revisit this annually and say, okay, what can we do in the next 12 months as we're getting ready for the next fiscal year to make an impact on this and make some way toward that 3 to 5 year vision. And it could be that you're going to, maybe you need to release a suite of 5 products to meet the 5-year vision. Maybe you're going to release one of them, or maybe you're going to make 20% progress on all 5 of them. so that you can continue that path going forward. It will mean different things to different people, but that's the way I would think about it. As far as your second question is concerned, you were asking about enterprise. Oh, and yeah, okay, right, and sharing with customers. So, um, it's a challenge. I understand. So I work in the B2B space. So, you know, we work with large financial institutions, and oftentimes, you know, there's a desire for them to understand what we're doing long term and whether that is enough for them to feel like we are innovating. There's that word, to innovate and to give them what they need. I try usually in these situations to keep the conversation higher level and more about the vision. I just find that sometimes when you sit there with a roadmap with a customer, I don't know, in my experience, it just they don't fully understand it. They don't know how to parse it because it's not how they think necessarily. And then oftentimes you can get yourself caught because, you know, we know that things change and hopefully we're communicating that well to our customers, but it can be challenging, especially if you have like, you know, contractual relationships with your customers and they're being renewed on some regular basis and they're trying to find sort of leverage for, you know, lowering the cost or whatever it might be. I just find that sometimes it ends up biting me in the butt. But that said, I mean, there are good, let's say friendly, they don't even have to be friendly. There are customers that will engage in a really collaborative, helpful way. And for those conversations, I'm much more willing to share an actual view of a roadmap and talk about what that means and get that feedback and all that stuff. But yeah, in general, I would practice and advise people to try to learn how to have that conversation about your strategy and what your vision is without necessarily having to throw a slide up that shows the next 4 quarters and what you're releasing. And when you do have to do that, yeah, try to err toward the side of the outcome-based roadmap and talk in terms of the value delivered to the customer. The minute you get into the details about, well, we're releasing this, that, and it's going to do this little thing and that little thing, you're going to tend to lose them.
Yep. Yeah. I also love the now, next, later too, as a
Yeah.
hot tip to get away from very specific date commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a follow-up related question. When you talk about outcomes, do you mean KPIs or what other types of outcomes?
It's a great question. I try to make the distinction that an outcome is not a KPI in and of itself. It's not a number per se. It's not a metric. You use KPIs and metrics to measure your progress toward objectives. So an objective is more of a, you know, a statement like, let me try to use an example. A near-term target outcome, you know, might be something like, we want to increase the timeliness of this data set so that instead of the data coming out an average of 24 hours later, it comes out an hour later. Now, to a degree, that's a KPI because that you're talking about numbers, but it's really about, you know, why does that outcome matter? It's because, well, maybe the customer is making investment trades based off that data and they can't successfully do that. They have to wait 24 hours. So that's the way to think about the outcome. And then, and you know, in order to do that, you need to reduce the time that data gets in the hands of the customer. And then within that, you can have KPIs. Maybe some of the KPIs relate to how quickly you collect that data. Maybe some of those KPIs are, you know, how long does it take to get from this point in the organization to this point in the organization? How long does it take once you deliver it for it to actually show up and be usable to the customer? How many support queries are you getting in that are about, hey, your timeliness isn't good enough? You know, how many deals are we losing because of timeliness? Those are the kinds of things that you can measure. You have a baseline.
Mhm.
You identify what your target needs to be to support your outcome, and then you track that KPI over time as a way to judge your progress toward it. That's the sort of hierarchy of how I would think of objectives and KPIs. It's basically like the OKR type of method, is I think a helpful way to think about it.
No, that's great. You talked a little bit about maybe the overuse of tools and frameworks at times. Kind of what are the symptoms? How can you tell when you've gone too far as an organization? And then would love to hear some practical advice on like maybe how you've unwound some of that in the past.
Yeah, the second question is a hard one. Let's start with the first one. So, um, yeah, so the symptoms, I think the biggest symptom to me is how much time are people spending doing value add work? Like, there's things that need to be done to meet or to follow your roadmap to meet the objectives that you've set. How much of that of a product manager's or developer's time is being spent directly affecting that? If that starts to seem out of whack, there's a lot of time spent filling out documentation in meetings, just talking about things that could be, by the way, meetings, right? This is a little aside here. It's very difficult for product managers to get away from the constant meetings, but I advise everybody look at your calendar and be relentless in trying to clear that space. Some meetings you cannot avoid, and that's fine. But try to find, like, if there's 10 people in a meeting and 8 people are looking at their email off to the side but not really being productive, there's a waste of people's time. So meetings is one of the main killers. Procedures and documentation is another. I want to be very careful here though, because being a pragmatist is not about being extreme one way or the other. So yes, it's a magical fictional world where there's no need to document anything or justify anything. Um, but that doesn't exist. And so it's all about finding that balance. But if people are spending too much time on that stuff, it's slowing things down. If you feel like people don't have the ability to be decisive and say, okay, we're going to do this thing, that's usually a good sign. If there's too much analysis paralysis, if there's too much consensus building, again, consensus building, great. Too much of it, horrible. It really paralyzes an organization. So those are some of the symptoms that I see. As far as unwinding it, once you've diagnosed the problem, it's very difficult. Outside of, like, one of the easiest ways to do this, but you can't force this all the time, is when a new leader comes in to lead the team or a new CPO, and they have a completely different way of thinking about things. They sort of have the clout and the ability to say, we're going to start from scratch and peel back the things that are unnecessary, identify the things that are necessary, and build back from there. Even though that's usually how you see those things happen, that doesn't mean you can't find a way to do that yourself on a small scale. It's fine to have a conversation with your team and people that you work with about, hey, what are the things that you feel like are valuable? And what are the things that you spend your time on that you just don't get it? And if they just don't get it, maybe they just need to be educated. You're not going to change that thing, but they need to better understand why they need to do it. If they don't know why they can do it and you can't tell them why, and no one can tell you why, then just sort of slowly stop doing that thing. And I think at the end of the day, it's a bit scary because, we all want to look good and do good work. But honestly, at a certain level, like, all your manager or your manager's manager cares about is results. And if you can show that changes that you've made have made their way to good results, there's not going to be that many people that care that you stopped doing that meeting or you stopped doing that documentation. But it takes a lot of bravery. I'm making it sound easy, but start small, have open conversations about it, and see if you can make those small changes. I think it's a good way to start, and to show leadership as well, which I think is always important for people in our positions.
I love that. Yeah, I think there's oftentimes a lot of analysis, but not enough leadership, right? And the leadership is take the analysis and then say, and here's the things I'm going to do. So what I hear you saying is like, maybe go to your manager and say like, listen, I'm spending 10 hours in a bunch of these meetings. These are pretty ineffective. I'm going to cut like half of these, and maybe you get the permission, even do it as an experiment. I'm going to cut all these that I think are irrelevant, and if we can still achieve the same outcomes, let's do that instead.
Denise, I just have to say, I love the way you put that, because to the extent that you can, think about and phrase changes to your internal process in the same way you would phrase doing your product management work. We know the value of running experiments and trying to identify the best path forward and comparing results. It's shocking how good PMs tend to be at doing that for their products and their customers, but how bad they are about doing it internally.
Right.
So think of
So
it that way. like we have that skill set and that way of thinking, apply that internally. And you probably get, it's going to be easier to get some more buy-in if you talk in that way, because people understand that language.
Love it. Love it. So let's pivot now maybe to the sales side of the equation. So can you talk about some effective techniques, maybe some examples of what's worked for you or what you've tried and haven't been successful at, for collaborating with sales to gather those insights while still maintaining, control, and I'm going to put control in air quotes, of the roadmap, because I think we are stewards of it. I don't think we often control it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the number one thing is to treat salespeople as a valuable stakeholder and assume they have something valuable to say. That doesn't mean the way that they say it or the urgency with which they say it is, is in line, but you sort of have to, that's what I mean about finding the signal in the noise is salespeople have a certain way about them. Salespeople are successful because of certain things that might make them difficult in some cases to work with for us because product managers tend to be very like, sort of black and white and by the book, whereas a salesperson will sort of do what they can to bring something over the line. And so there's a natural, I'm oversimplifying, of course, but like there's a natural sort of yin and yang to that. So just the first step is understand that and be okay with that. And don't be scared off, when you have a, high flying salesperson giving you a bunch of feedback and even making direct requests. That's the thing, the first thing. The second thing is and I would say this is the same for HiPPOs too, is peel it back to its most essential essence. Like we know, or some of us know, that customers are not always great at phrasing what they need. So we try not to ask customers, what do you want? You talk to them and you get them talking about their, if this is a B2B context, you get them to talk about the work that they do and the difficulty with it. And it's your job to then connect that to possible solutions and go from there. Do the exact same thing with salespeople. They might, talk a mile a minute and have a lot to say, ask questions, get in their shoes, peel it back. And you'll often find that there's some nugget in there that may not be what you expected initially. And honestly, it might not be what they thought that they were talking about at first either. The other thing is that, like it's funny how often I ask salespeople to bring back some evidence. I phrase it right, but like, like, oh, like give me some examples so I could better understand this. And then they either never follow up or they do and they're like, I looked into it, it's not quite what I thought, or it's different than what I expected. Like I said, put the onus on them and be comfortable with that. If they come yelling about something, so love to talk about this, love to see what I can do. Like, can you just help me? Like, I just want to understand it better, and I want to be able to make a better decision. And put it on them to sort of justify that. So, I don't know if I lost track there at all. Did I answer the question?
No, I think you did. And then like tactically, what does that look like for you? Do you, meet with them quarterly in advance of sort of planning cycles, assuming you plan quarterly or whatever cadence you plan? Like, how do you make sure that you are treating them as that stakeholder,
Mhm.
the tactics?
Yeah. So the first thing is to really try to build some relationships. Depending on the size of your organization, you're not going to know every single salesperson, but know a few in all the different areas, people that work with these types of customers, people that work in all these different regions of the globe, just regular contact. And it's just small stuff. It's like I read like meeting notes in Salesforce and things like that. And if there's something, if they're talking about a product that I manage, there might not be anything to do about it, but I try to make a point to reach out and say, hey, hello, I'm here. I manage this product. Like, glad to hear you doing this. Let me know if you need help. And 90% of the time, it's all good. And they never really follow up. But what you do is you slowly show that you're paying attention. You start to show that they can trust you. Like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. They're paying attention to things. And maybe when things get released in the future, I say, oh, I remember, person A. Let me reach out to them and say, oh, by the way, you might want to see it. It's really that small stuff, I think, that makes the biggest difference. And then when you have that, um, I was going to say direct line, but that sort of implies that like then you're just talking to salespeople all day, and you don't want to make it seem as though that they could just call you up and short circuit every single thing, but you're building the relationship so that they respect you and they're more willing to sort of come together and talk about these things when they happen. The worst thing is always when a salesperson comes to you and it's the first time you're ever talking to them, and there's some big ask, something a big client needs, or they're trying to close some deal. Again, that will happen. You can't prevent it completely, but the conversation tends to go a lot better when you've built even a base level relationship. And then the other thing that I do, so to answer the question directly, I don't like have a regular cadence that I try to speak to salespeople. But one of the other things that I do is I keep an eye on our sales pipeline. And if there's a big sales opportunity that has something to do with my product, I'm actually in the middle of meeting with every salesperson that has a six-figure sales opportunity for the products that I manage. This has worked out to conversations with about 24 different salespeople, and we're doing like 20 to 30-minute calls with each of them, and just understanding the sales opportunity, seeing how I can help and the team can help. And oftentimes these conversations just lead to other things that are really insightful. They tell us a little bit more about the competition, what they're seeing out in the market. And I think I found that to be really helpful. So those are some of the sort of methods I use to make sure I stay in touch with salespeople. And that way it's timely and relevant for them. I think if you sort of reach out to them out of the blue and try to schedule time, it might not make sense. It sort of depends on, I guess, the culture at your company and how the salespeople operate. But in my experience, that's sort of ad hoc, but like always in tune and always reaching out with little comments here and there, shooting them a message on Teams, it seems to work quite well for me. I also have to admit, though, I was in sales, like I said, for many years, so I know a lot of salespeople from that time. So I have an advantage. I have a privilege there, which makes my job there a little bit easier. Plus, I sort of know how they think because I did it myself. So if you don't have that experience, that's okay. That doesn't. You can also, have the same success.
I love it. I mean, like you gave a lot of practical advice there. Like number one, I'd say like my key takeaways are like build relationships early. Nobody wants to phone a friend, when there's not really a friend on the other line, it's a stranger. So like build the relationships. I also love what you said about focusing on like your, big deals, right? Because, those are likely the ones that might ask you for something or might want product enhancements are probably going to be your more demanding customers. On the flip side, you can also learn like, hey, what are those sales folks doing that you might want to replicate?
Mhm.
And then the other thing you said that I thought was really valuable that I think folks should definitely take away from this is you mentioned, knowing different salespeople who cover different customer segments or different regions. So really getting that, representative sample. So
Yeah, I
I think
find that,
really
yeah,
great.
yeah, you nailed it. And yeah, with the big problem with salespeople is there are very loud salespeople. And if those are the only people you listen to and you only react to the people that find you, you're getting a very unrepresentative sample of what salespeople might think at your company, and certainly what your customers are thinking. So always be aware of that.
Yeah, I love that. We've got probably time for one, maybe two more questions. We'll see how we do. All right, so here's one. In your meetings with the sales team with the high value pipeline, do you talk about the client use case? What is the primary topic?
Yeah, it sort of starts out with just, hey, fill me in on what this is. And that's usually this client is X kind of client. They do this kind of workflow and they need this data, to bring it all together. So it's really just getting the information. Usually it's in that conversation where there's tidbits of like, oh, they currently use this, one of our competitors, but they have a challenge with this thing about the competitor's data. And that might be something I wasn't even aware of. So that's already in that sort of high level conversation, you're getting a lot of value. And then quickly we sort of change the conversation to like, what can I do to help? Like, just, I think it's very important for the way I like to put it, when you release a product or you ship a feature, however you want to think of it, to some that feels like getting to a finish line. To me, that's getting to the starting line because it's all about commercial success. It doesn't matter how much time and effort you put into developing a product or an enhancement or a feature if it didn't do anything. And this is easier said than done. It's hard to track this sometimes and measure it, but At the end of the day, that's what matters. So I try to spend a good amount of my time on sales enablement and sales support, because at the end of the day, that's where we're going to find success. And the more success you have with the products out today, the more money hopefully you can get to invest in the products that will come out tomorrow. And that's how you grow your product area, and that's how the company succeeds. So, and obviously salespeople are always very receptive to this. They're always looking for help and people they can bring in to say, oh, here's the director of this or the senior director of that. Clients love that. So just throw it out there, and they'll probably be more than happy to connect you with some customers.
I love what you just said, and I think I have to say, as a product leader, as a CPO, it might be the thing I love the most. Is that is just the starting line once you launch something. And I think that when many of us have started in our career, we think that's the finish line. But that's, I think, really great advice. Like, our job is the business outcomes. And
Yeah,
so
right.
just
Yeah.
launching.
It's very hard to train for the marathon, but
Yeah.
when you wake up on marathon day, I've never run a marathon, by the way. You wake up on marathon day, get to the starting line, like it's again, we're not saying the work you did before that didn't matter. It does matter because you need to do that to be successful in the race. But the race is the really the commercial success. So yeah, that's something I'm really trying to hammer into the heads of a lot of people I'm working with.
And I love that mental model. It is a great, great mental example to use. I can't thank you enough, Rico, from the Products that Count community, and those of you that joined live today, and those that will watch this and take advantage of all this knowledge after the fact. So thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us here tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, take care.